morning, everybody. Can I just say thank you for Christopher and I are out today them and before I begin, I want to so we're a come back home or could be able to come and visit us here in New Zealand. It's so important for our tourism sector. It of course was our largest sector. It employed 380,000 people. The industry's been doing it incredibly tough. They want to trade, they want to be able to get going. But one of the key challenges is that we don't have holiday maker visas working holiday visas that we need in place for the tourism sector. And so there is a real competition at the moment in the world to attract working holiday makers to respective countries because the tourism sector is definitely going to need them. Australia's been working hard at it. They've been advertising, promoting around the world the opportunity of coming to work in Australia. They're only getting a third of the volume of people that they were getting previously before COVID. So we're calling on the government to say, hey, listen, support the tourism industry, support also places like Kiwi Fruit, who also rely on backpackers and working holiday people, but make sure that you can do that by refunding the fee, extending the age, letting people have multiple applications as well. It's going to be so important to get the tourism sector up and running and actually working properly. And finally, I just want to say, we think it's important, given what we're seeing with tourism, what we're seeing with small business, that we as a country now start to move forward and we actually start to get back to some normalcy again. And that with Omicron, clearly the risk is very different. And we actually think that it's now time for us to start to dismantle many of the COVID restrictions that we've had in place. And we're calling on that today, and I've asked Chris to come and talk a little bit more about what we want to do in that space.
It's time to start getting back to normality, and so what we're calling on today is for the government to do a few things immediately. The first is it's time to drop the scanning requirements, the QR code requirements. No longer make any sense. Most people don't scan. You can see that in the numbers, and I freely admitted that I sometimes forget to scan in. And there really isn't any point. We're not tracking casual contacts anymore. Drop the scanning requirements. The second thing is we need to drop vaccine pass requirements immediately for all but the most high-risk indoor events. So that means no more vaccine passes to go to a cafe, go to a restaurant, for example. The risk profile of Omicron has just changed the game fundamentally. We need to phase out vaccine pass requirements immediately for young people doing school sport, for example. When the government says they fixed that problem, they haven't. There are 14-year-olds who are not allowed to go kayaking outside because they're not vaccinated. That is ludicrous. The risk profile, again, for young people, particularly participating outside, doesn't make any sense. And so on a simple cost-benefit risk analysis, we need to get rid of that. So those are the things we would do in the short term. Once we start to open the border to Australians, which will be from April 13, that really has to be D-Day, because at that point we are going to have Australians coming into New Zealand. We welcome them. It'll be logistically basically impossible to impose vaccine pass requirements on Australians coming to New Zealand. There is a process to get them. It's highly cumbersome. It only works for the limited number of foreigners coming in at the moment. So once we have mass tourism coming to New Zealand, vaccine pass requirements need to end. So we're saying from April 13, in the traffic light system, in the vaccine pass system, and start to phase out those mandates. And we need to recognise that the mandates and the vaccine pass system has created in New Zealand a real sense of division. It has created a divide between the unvaccinated and the vaccinated. And life is pretty tough if you have made the decision not to be vaccinated. And life is pretty tough for kids aged 12 and above who are affected by the vaccine pass and vaccine mandate system. It's time to start getting back to normality, start to lift those restrictions that are affecting our business sector and affecting New Zealanders. Omicron has fundamentally changed the game. The public health risk analysis does not justify vaccine passes and vaccine mandates in this new environment. And so we're calling on the government to do a few things immediately and get ready for the lifting of traffic lights and mandates once Australians can come from April 13.
Brilliant.
I mean, the government has made it pretty clear that they're going to be making announcements early next week around all these things. Aren't you just kind of calling for we're going to do anything?
Well, let's wait and see. The government has shown a reasonable degree of caution on all of these issues so far, and what we're calling for is what we think should happen. We're the opposition party. We're a responsible opposition party. People often ask us, what do you think should be happening? We're putting our cards on the table and saying, scanning doesn't make any sense anymore. Vaccine mandate restrictions for kids playing sport don't make any sense. From April 13, the traffic light system doesn't make any sense either. That's what we think, and we're putting that to the country.
What about these Kiwis who are looking at thousands of Kiwis in hospitals around the country? You've got people dying every day. A lot of people are going to look at this and be worried about loosening restrictions at a time where it's never been so bad.
Look, I think what we're saying is the risk has changed dramatically. If the risk changes again, certainly you put different measures in place. But for right now, we're ready to go. Fundamentally, the country's in good shape. We're able to start to unpack as we've been talking about these restrictions.
A lot of this is similar to tax policies. Are you copying them?
No, this is our view about the world, which is just saying, look, we're up and down this country each and every week. We're talking to business owners, we're talking to community groups, and this is the right response right now. The country needs to get back to normal. We need to be able to think about a future beyond Omicron and beyond COVID, and now's the time for us to start moving mentally to say, how do we actually make a future happen for New Zealanders and Kiwis, and how do we get that happening?
Say to the people out there who are really sick of COVID, a lot of it don't. I mean, a lot of deaths being reported every day.
Sorry, I couldn't hear you.
There's still a lot of deaths being reported every day, and there's a lot of trouble in the community. You're saying we should move on from COVID. What do you say to that?
What we're saying here is we're managing the risk, and the risk as we see it right now is actually saying, well, look, we're opening up to tourists. How do you actually function with vaccine passes with tourists in this country? Are they actually effective? Vaccine mandates, vaccine passes have served us incredibly well. Don't get me wrong, we were big fans of it. They served us incredibly well through earlier incarnations of different variants. But for Omicron and the world we're in now, they have much less utility, much less relevance.
You've said that you want to keep the COVID protection framework sort of ready to step in if something else happens, if there's another variant. Most epidemiologists say that there will be another variant by the end of the year. Are you kind of ready to backpedal on this policy a bit if the risk profile changes?
Well, this is the point that we've been saying, is that you have to constantly evolve your mindset. And the challenge has been that we've been stuck in a 2020 mindset in 2021 and then in 2022. And the reality is risks go up and down, and so measures should go up and down. And what we're saying is dispassionately looking at the risk that we've got right where we are right now, it's okay to make these restrictions and remove these restrictions. Should there be a different threat and a different risk, then you put in place a different set of measures to accompany
that
that.
different set of measures would be something like the COVID protection framework with what, like gathering sizes and maybe vaccine passes
Well, it
again
depends.
or something, or what?
It'll depend upon what the risk and what the threat is, but we should do a very dispassionate assessment of what that is and then put the right course of measures in place. But what we're saying right here, right now, is you can't just leave the country in in the mode that it's in. You've got to be able to adjust the modes, change the gears, manage the risk.
And just talking of that risk, what risk would these sort of plans have to our most sort of vulnerable populations, people with disabilities?
Well, I mean, the good news is with Omicron, the risk profile is really for people 60 plus. Now, 95% of New Zealanders over 12 are fully vaccinated, but the thing that some people forget sometimes is that for 60 plus population, 85% of everyone aged 60 and above in every DHB is boosted.
Yep.
So 85% and above. In fact, in some DHBs, 90% of people aged 60 and above are boosted, not just fully vaccinated, they're boosted. And so, there are people out there who are unvaccinated, but there are very few who are aged 60 plus who are not vaccinated and not boosted. And that is really where the risk lies. And we know that Omicron is more infectious. That's one of the reasons why the vaccine pass rules don't make any sense anymore. But it is much less severe, particularly for younger people. And so, that's all part of the reason why we need to move beyond the COVID protection framework, which, let's remember, was designed for a system under Delta. It was designed for Delta. We're now with Omicron. Delta's basically gone from New Zealand. We've now got 20,000 plus COVID cases per day of Omicron. We need to adjust, as Christopher says, we need to adjust our thinking and adjust our protection framework because of that.
And this is a sort of science-backed plan?
Yeah, well, we're very confident that the science backs this up, and you just need to look at the numbers of people getting COVID, people getting Omicron, who are vaccinated or in some cases boosted as well. Omicron busts through double vaccination, it busts through boosters. It's not a reason to say don't get boosted. People should go and get boosted. The individual benefits of being boosted are clearly manifold, but the collective benefits of saying to people you can't go to a cafe unless you're vaccinated, you can't go kayaking as a 14-year-old unless you're vaccinated, you can't go outside and play golf unless you're vaccinated. The collective benefits of those sort of rules don't exist anymore. The individual benefits of being vaccinated and boosted clearly exist, but we've got to return to a bit of individual responsibility, use rapid antigen testing, ask people to get vaccinated, but not mandate it so much and not have a very complex and burdensome system of bureaucratic rules that impose cost on businesses and also cost on individuals through those mandates.
Come out and say, look, we're dropping these now. Why do you think it has to be so bureaucratic?
Well, look, I think the challenge that we've had with the COVID response in general is this has been a government that just is constantly sort of responding to the opposition, responding to the media, responding to the public, and sort of making it up on the way. I mean, it's not that long ago that the international visitor thing has been sitting out there for some time. Everything's been a little bit too slow. It's always 10 steps too slow, a little bit too little, too late, and so. I think it's a mindset problem, which is you've got a very dynamic risk in front of you. You adjust the settings and the responses to that risk, and that's what we're talking about here today. So I mean, our again, it's part of laying out a plan of right. We've got to move this country on. We have to get back to normal. We have to be able to resume normal life. We've got to carry on our businesses. We've got to engage with the rest of the world and open up to the world. And so let's carry on doing that. That's what we're proposing today.
Would you be comfortable to take your family to Eden Park to watch the Blues, for example?
I would be. Yeah, I would be.
You reckon you'll do that?
Well, I'm a Canterbury Crusaders follower, so I mean, like, I've got to be honest with you. So I mean, I know that cost me thousands of votes in Auckland, but it is what it is.
Isn't allowing, sort of being a couple of steps slower, allow for caution?
Yeah, but look, I think we've been in we get stuck in a mindset, right? And it's understandable, you can see, but we've been stuck in a mindset, and we're not managing risk dynamically, and it's all about risk management. And I think that's the challenge. The risk goes up, the risk goes down. We adjust our measures and metrics to be able to deal with that, and rather than being locked into a position and keeping it in place for longer than it needed to be, and when we can actually free the joint up and actually get people moving and getting on with their lives and getting back to their lives.
The last One News poll showed a significant, or a majority of people supported vaccine mandates still. I think a recent poll showed a lot of support for keeping border measures relatively restrictive as well. Do you think, and all political parties support eventually relaxing mandates, all political parties support eventually opening the border. Do you kind of think there's an issue with the public lagging the political opinion here? Like there's a lot of vote that isn't finding a home in any political party's position on COVID. I
think it depends what the question is, right? So if you say to people, do you support vaccine mandates? I think a lot of people just read that as, do you support vaccination? And the reality is, 95% of Kiwis have gone out and got fully vaccinated. Most people have got boosted. So I think a lot of people just read that as, do you support vaccines? And most people do. If you say to people, do you think a 14-year-old shouldn't be allowed to kayak outside unless they're vaccinated? I'd put it to you, you'd get probably the opposite result. Most people would say, no, that's nuts. But that is unfortunately the way the rules work at the moment. So what we're saying is, there has to be a date for the phase out of vaccine mandates. Everyone agrees on that, or most people agree on that, apart from the most extreme on the public health community. What we're saying is April 13 is as good a date as any, because Australians can start to come at that point, and of course the risk profiles change. There are people who would say do it right now. There are people who would have said do it 3 months ago. There are people who didn't support them right from the start. Now we supported vaccine mandates at the beginning. We called for health workers to be mandated back in April, May, because Delta, the benefits of vaccination under Delta were so clear, and the benefits of stopping transmission were so clear. But the science has changed. When the science changes, the public policy response has to change, and at the moment we're stuck in a bit of stasis. What we're saying is, let's move forward, let's move on.
Do you think the Prime Minister and the Director General have to front foot this changing risk dynamic a bit more and publicly de-escalate the kind of fear that people have of this variant as opposed to different variants? Well,
I mean, that's what we've been saying for several months now, is show us telegraph, map out the plan, show us exactly, what comes next, where we're going, and put all of this out there. And I think all we're saying is, look, we're ready to go. Removal of these measures, we're managing in a risk way. The risk is appropriate. These measures are appropriate for the risk that we've got. Hey, listen, we've got. Sorry.
Considering those risks and considering how the government's approached the mandates to people, what do you think about the timeline?
Oh, look, I mean, we're ready for tourists to come back in the time frame that we've got. The bottom line is that, the risk is not sitting at the border. The risk has been sitting in the community for some time. And I can tell you, the risk, from a public health risk point of view, that's fine. From a tourism sector, to have these tourists back in this country so they can start trading again every day, every week makes a big difference. Now we're talking about the enabling bits that actually support them getting back up on their feet and getting the sector back where it needs to be. And that gets you back to working holiday maker visas, that we really have to be able to get into and be able to get some of the enabling bits that enable the sector to do well again and to succeed again. That's, if you think about it, hospitality and tourism, I just don't think the government's fully appreciated how difficult it has been. They have been structurally challenged the most of every sector in this economy, and when you go and spend time with them, like Chris and I have, both in Queenstown and Auckland and Wellington, and you see these businesses, they've been doing it incredibly tough. So the public health risk is we're good to go, and from an industry development point of view and getting the show back on the road and getting New Zealand back on track again and engaging with the world is important. It's the right time.
Do you think the government is scared of picking up opposition ideas? So instead of picking up some of the same ideas, it tweaks it and then kind of announces a slightly different Labour version of events?
Well, look, I mean, I said when I became the leader, we would oppose the government and we would also propose ideas as well, and that's what we've been working hard to do. Whether it's been Ukraine and with autonomous sanctions, whether it's been Ukraine with the humanitarian visa, I mean, those were things we're calling for, from day one. They came 2 or 3 weeks later, but the fact that if the government wants to take our ideas, it's actually in New Zealand's interests. If they're good ideas and it helps New Zealand, we're all for that. That's great. We're doing our job as an opposition, which is to oppose the government, but also to propose ideas.
But do you think?
No. I mean, we have ideas every single week. I'd just put it to you. Many of you were with us in Queenstown at our caucus offsite. Look at what we were saying then in terms of 7-day isolation periods, about when we could actually bring returning Kiwis home. Chris has done an exceptional job over the last year. He's been talking about rapid antigen tests. If you think about earlier in the year, last year. So we have been the people. We have our own thoughts about it, and it's important we do, because the New Zealand people need to see that we are an alternative government in waiting, and that's what I want them to see. And so they don't get to see that unless we propose ideas, and that's what we should be doing in opposition.
You talked about how the framework could be reinstated if the risk increased. Can you talk about what that would look like, and just going back to the sort of science-backed evidence for this plan? Can you sort of talk to what evidence you looked at to
Look, I don't think it's worth getting into hypotheticals. We don't know what's going to happen, but the point is we've got the vaccine pass system now that's been developed very quickly, but it basically functionally works. We have the protection framework that has been applied for the last few months. We're calling for it to be phased out, but look, if there was new variants, you may go back to gathering limits, for example. You may require particular things. So the system is there. Our point is it doesn't make any sense anymore right now, but you assess things as they come. And that's, frankly, that's what the government does at the moment. What we're saying is it's time to move on right now.
We asked one question, which was who would you like to see running the country if Cindy were doing it yourself? It was pretty much neck and neck, the results. Were you surprised by that? What was your analysis of that?
Oh, look, the analysis, I don't get too caught up in polls, but I mean, the analysis, frankly, is that New Zealanders actually are feeling very frustrated with the government. They don't feel there's all spin, no delivery. They don't have a sense of where we're going. They feel lost, and they also are very worried about this cost of living crisis. I mean, it's very real for people. We're going to go spend time this afternoon with three different business groups, and I guarantee you that's going to be a bigger challenge for people. And they are really worried about who are the best economic managers of this country. And I think that's the message that I took out from those polls, is that.
So you sort of saw yourself as benefiting?
Well, it's we've got half, I think, more than half this country think we're heading in the wrong direction, right? And so they're essentially saying, look, we do need a pathway, we need a plan, we need a vision of where we're going, we need clarity about that. We need to trust people to be able to manage the cost of living crisis that we're seeing and the economic management of this country going forward. And so, that's my read of the reaction that we saw in those polls.
One of the biggest issues in the next few weeks of the pandemic is going to be staffed ICU beds as we crest in the rest of the country. Will National go to the election promising to deliver more ICU beds than there are currently in the country, more ICU beds than Labour?
Well, we'll announce our election policy closer to the election. But you know, we have said for some time now that you know, the COVID fund shouldn't have been spent on things like Three Waters and cameras on fishing boats and literally everything on Grant Robertson's wish list, but ICU beds, which is what most Kiwis thought it was being spent on until they discovered the opposite.
It's not a difficult thing to commit to now, though. Like, why not just commit to, like, you know, a few more ICU beds in each DHB?
Look, I mean, we'll deal with our election policies, you know, as we go through the year. But all I'd say to you is, I remember asking the Prime Minister my very first question time about ICU beds and why don't we have more? Why haven't we added more since this thing started? And we haven't added a single bed, and so it's all a little bit too little, too late again. But you know, as I said, we'll talk about a broader health policy and broader election policy later.
Just quickly, what was your reaction when you heard about Sewera Gardiner last night?
Oh, I mean, I never got to meet Sewera, but I actually knew of him through his reputation and through people who had met him. And just struck me as an exceptional New Zealander. I mean, incredibly. I mean, what a life. I mean, in terms of, you know, well educated, outstanding military career, took on really challenging public and private sector roles, instrumental in Māori Crown negotiations and relationships, and then obviously a great historian and loved history when you start to see the books that he started to write as an author. So you know, it's fantastic and it's inspiring when you see New Zealanders with public service like that, who bring their leadership and, you know, navigate history and times in New Zealand and all the ups and downs that he had to go through was just inspiring. And so, you know, from my point of view, it's just you know, it's a life incredibly well lived, and I think it's an inspiration to all of us to say, well, what are we doing with our lives? Are we making it all count as well? You know, so he certainly made his life count big time.
Thanks very much.
Okay, thank you guys.